Welcome to Keto Life Support, where we make your keto life sustainable, fun, and low stress. I'm Kim Howerton, and I'll be coming to you weekly with some of my keto besties to bring you the practical, real-world keto advice that you need. Quick disclaimer, I am not a doctor, and even if we do have a doctor in the house from time to time, he or she is not your doctor, and nothing we say on this show should be taken as medical advice. Always check in with a trusted medical professional about your own personal medical concerns.
Hello and welcome to Keto Life Support. This is Kim Howerton with episode number 204. And today we're going to be diving a bit into the identity crisis. Who the heck am I if I'm not trying to lose weight? So this kind of was an offshoot of the thoughts I had on last podcast around the fact that weight loss is kind of boring. But I had a follow-up thought based on some conversations around the topic. I don't know if it's a new thought. I think I've discussed this before, but I feel like it was a good thing that I didn't really talk about last time we podcasted around why it can be so hard to maintain a weight loss or keep on it when you're down to the last 10 pounds, which sometimes can feel almost as hard as the last 100 pounds. And one of the things that I didn't talk about was the identity crisis piece. This is not as much for people who gained weight after they had kids or when they hit menopause, right? Those people have different identity crises. And this identity crisis that I'm talking about today could apply to those people too, perhaps in certain ways. But I feel like the population that this most strongly applies to are people who really can't remember a time, or at least not much of a time, when they weren't fighting their weight. So this is my friends who were the big kid in elementary school, the people who didn't fit in the Girl Scout uniform and could only wear the sash, the girls who had to wear the boys' size t-shirt on the team because they didn't make a big enough one for the girls, and the boys who didn't even fit in the boys' sizes at all. It's that growing up with an identity of the big kid, or whatever they called you, right? But the bigger one. And then coming into your mid-years, your teens, still with your identity wrapped up in that. And then you get to adulthood and your life is about, maybe it's times on diets, times off diets, times gaining weight, times losing weight, whatever. But pretty much the primary chunk of your struggle in your life and the primary chunk of your identity has been a person trying to lose weight. They're a little different, right? They're related often, but there's the big person is one identity and they're overlapping. It's like a Venn diagram with a big circle in the middle that overlaps for a lot of people. Now, some people just embrace the big person identity. They're not like, I'm not trying to lose weight. I'm just a big person. And they reject the diet mentality, diet identity. But the majority of us at least spent some time with that, I'm trying to lose weight. And your primary identity, the thing that defined your day to day, your every waking moment that wasn't occupied by something that had to get done, was about weight loss. You woke up in the morning thinking about it to some degree. You got certainly while you were getting dressed, you were thinking about it and you're like, these sizes, this doesn't look good. Throwing clothes on and off, trying to look good, going shopping and buying what fit instead of what you liked, right? This identity, this central identity of a person trying to lose weight, whether you want to call that a dieting person or whatever it was. But that was like this, I hope this is clear. It's not like an action piece. It's an identity piece, because you had that identity even while you were eating a Big Mac. You had that identity even while you were doing whatever thing that was not going to cause weight loss, because now you were acting in opposition to that. So it was always a part of the constant dialogue. And then you get to a point in your life where, I don't care what point that is, but some point in your life where you have either lost all of the weight, most of the weight, you're no longer an obese person. Maybe now you're just working on a small amount of weight loss, but the goal would be that eventually you would become a person who is not trying to lose weight. And that's where I think a lot of us short circuit because we have so much of an attachment to the identity of a person trying to lose weight that even the thought of not being that person anymore is almost frightening. And so for some of us, we get to the not needing to lose weight place and we can't recognize it. And then we become little nutso and go too far in the other direction. Or sometimes we see that line approaching and it's such an enormous shift, we can't make it. It's the person who regains 100 pounds when they're 5 pounds from their goal. So it could be you made it to goal and you can't stay there, or you almost made it to goal and the idea of reaching goal was so overwhelming to your identity that you shifted reverse gear, or you just stay buffered in that little, I still want to lose 10 pounds. I still want to lose 10 pounds, but you're not like taking efforts to do it because then at least you can hang on to this identity piece. And a lot of people will listen to me saying this and say, well, that is nuts. That's crazy. Why would I want this painful identity? But that's not how our brains work. We will defend what we find is ours. And if that is the only identity we've ever known, if that is the only home we've ever been in, if that is the only orientation our brain has ever held, it's going to be very hard to get out of it. And one of the realities for many of us who that's been our primary fight is it has allowed us to hide in that fight and not really look at other things. It is an easy go-to, the easy go-to of my weight, dieting, trying to lose weight, not feeling acceptable enough. Because what happens when you get to the goal weight and you have to finally address all the other ways that you do not feel acceptable, that you do not feel good about yourself, and you just keep thinking, well, when I lose the weight, when I get to the goal, when I am a thin person or whatever you feel like that identity will then be, that fantasy identity, that fantasy you can put in the future, everything will be fixed. And then you get there and nothing is fixed except the size of clothes in your closet, but you're still not really happy. And you thought everything was magically going to be better. And now all these other things, wanting to lose weight is an easy scapegoat. It's an easy fantasy. Fantasy is amazing, right? That place where you can think, well, when I do this, when I win $1 million, all my problems will go away. When I am no longer fat, right? When I am, it's this fantasy. And sometimes we don't want to leave the fantasy because the reality is never as good. And so I think one of the things that anyone who wants to live a long-term different life is they're going to have to finally come to terms with needing a new identity and needing to develop an identity that is not based in what you don't have. Because when you base your identity in wanting to lose weight, it's a fantasy identity. It is an identity based in, I'm not yet thin, but one day when I am, I won't have all these issues, is kind of one of the thoughts, right? And your habits will determine a lot about who you are. And so you have these habits that are bringing about whatever weight loss you're looking for. And then what will my habits be? And so I think there's a real transitional period we have to get into from your primary struggle being about weight loss to being the person that you want to be and that you should be and that you are, and not putting the struggle first, not putting what you don't have first. Instead, starting bit by bit, bite by bite, to move the identity you have from a person who wants to lose weight to a healthy person. I have an identity of a healthy person. What does a healthy person do? Or fill in the blank on what are you, not what aren't you. And that will start the transition to being able to release the attachment to the identity of struggle. All right. Well, I wish you the best on the journey. Please let me know if you need me. Talk to you soon.
Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Keto Life Support. Want more information? Want show notes? Want to suggest a topic? Just head over to ketolifesupport.com. That's where all that kind of thing can go on. By the way, I have a request. If you could go to your podcast host and hit subscribe, we would really, really appreciate it. And what would be even more awesome is if you could write a review. And what would be even more awesome than that is if you could write like a really flattering review. Just asking, you do you. All right. So thanks so much for joining us. I'm thrilled that you're part of the Keto fam. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.